The trash can came at me sideways, spinning, spilling a comet's tail of refuse across the forecourt, and I did not move. That is the part people cannot understand even now. They ask me about it in the plain way that people ask a soldier about a scar, leaning in, half hoping for a story of rage barely contained, of a fist I wanted to throw and swallowed. There is no such story. The can struck the cobbles astride from my left boot, tumbled once, vomited its contents against the base of the gate pillar and rolled to a stop against the ornamental iron. Coffee cups, a greasy paper bag, cigarette ends. A bruised apple that split and rolled a foot further, as if it too were trying to flee the woman who had thrown it. And I stood at my post with my rifle at the slope and my eyes fixed on a point above the crowd, and I did not so much as blink. My name is Tobias Vane. At the time of the thing I am about to tell you, I was a corporal of the King's Guard, 31 years old, 11 years in the service, and I had been standing sentry at the east gate of Harrogate Palace for the better part of 2 hours, when a woman I had never met decided that I was the reason her morning had gone wrong. You should understand what the post is, because the post is the whole of it. When you stand sentry at the gate, you are not a man. You are a fixed point. You are the still center that tells every soul who passes that the house behind you is older than their anger and will outlast their impatience. The bearskin sits heavy and hot, the chin strap bites, the wool tunic is a furnace in July and a poor comfort in January. Your rifle weighs what it weighs, and by the second hour your shoulder has begun to file its quiet complaint. None of that shows. Nothing shows. That is the discipline, and the discipline is not a trick and it is not a costume. It is a promise. When you take the post, you promise the king and the crowd and yourself that whatever comes at you, the flashbulbs, the shouted questions, the teenagers daring one another to make you laugh, the drunk who wants to see if you are real, you will meet it with the same nothing. Because the moment you give a crowd your reaction, you have handed them the gate. So when I tell you the trash can came and I did not move, understand that this was not a heroic feat of restraint. It was Tuesday. It was the job. But I am ahead of myself, and the thing deserves the whole of its telling, because what happened afterward was not Tuesday at all. What happened afterward was the sort of thing that the palace still speaks of in the low, delighted voice men use for a story too neat to be invented. And I promise you it was not invented, because I was the one it happened to, and I have never once had the imagination to make up something so exactly, so poetically fair. Her name, I would learn, was Adeline Fenn. She arrived at the east gate a little after 11 that morning in the way that certain people arrive everywhere, as though the space had been waiting, unfinished, for her to complete it. I had watched 1,000 mornings' worth of visitors come through the square that fronts the gate, and you learn to read them the way a fisherman reads water. There are the pilgrims, who come to see the thing they have seen in photographs and are quietly moved to find it real. There are the families, harried and delighted, hoisting the little ones onto shoulders. There are the students with their sketchbooks and the old soldiers who stop and straighten without meaning to, and give me a nod I am not permitted to return but always feel. And then, now and again, there is the one who does not come to see the palace, the one who comes to be seen against it. Mrs. Fenn came to be seen against it. She was perhaps 50, expensively kept, in a cream coat that had never known weather and shoes that argued with the cobbles at every step. She had a small dog under one arm, a nervous, bug-eyed thing that trembled against her sleeve, and a telephone in the other hand held out before her like a lantern, filming as she came. Behind her trailed a younger woman, an assistant, I took her for, from the flinch in her shoulders, carrying 2 shopping bags and a tray of coffees, hurrying to keep the great cream comet in frame of her employer's demands. They stopped a few feet from my box. I felt the attention swing toward them the way a compass needle swings. The loose crowd of visitors, sensing an event, drifted in. "There," Mrs. Fenn said to her telephone to the world. "Look at this. Isn't he perfect? Isn't he just?" She said it the way you'd say it of a mannequin in a shop window. She turned the phone so the little screen caught me and the gate and the gilded lions above. "Say something to my followers," she told me. "Go on, just a wave. One wave and I'll leave you alone." I gave her the nothing, eyes forward above the crowd on the far cornice where a pigeon was making its slow census of the ledge. This is the moment where most people, having got their nothing, laugh and move on. The nothing is the show. They came for the statue and the statue performed statue and they are satisfied. Mrs. Fenn was not most people. The nothing to her was not the show. The nothing was insolence. She said, and the warmth went out of her voice like heat off a stone at dusk. Not even a smile. "All right." She stepped closer. The dog trembled. "You know I could buy this whole street, don't you? I mean the property, I could buy it. And you stand there in your little hat looking down your nose at me." She laughed, but it had gone brittle. "At me." The assistant behind her had gone very still, the way a person goes still near a dog that has started to growl. I want to be fair to Mrs. Fenn, insofar as fairness is owed her, and say this. I do not think she woke that morning intending to become a story. I think she was a woman who had spent a great many years being obeyed by everyone whose living depended on obeying her, and who had come to mistake that obedience for a law of nature, the way a man born rich mistakes the ground for something he is standing on rather than something he is standing on top of. She had never in her adult life met a person she could not move. And here at the gate was a person she could not move, in a red coat and a tall black hat, 6 feet of trained stillness, and every failure to move him was, to her, a small public humiliation, and she had come to the palace precisely to not be humiliated. And so the thing began to feed on itself. She snapped her fingers in front of my face, close enough that I felt the small wind of it. "Hello, hello, I'm talking to you." Her voice climbed. "Do you know who I am?" I did not, and it would not have mattered if I had. There is a thing I have learned in 11 years at the gate, and it is this. The question, "Do you know who I am?" is never asked by anyone who is anyone. The truly powerful never ask it, because the truly powerful can see in the calm of the person before them whether they are known, and if they are not, they are secure enough not to need it. It is only the frightened who ask. It is a question that means, underneath, "Please tell me I matter." And it is the saddest question in the world, and it is almost always asked as a threat. "I asked you a question," she said. The crowd had grown. I could hear the little rustle of a dozen phones being lifted, the collective held breath of people who could feel that something was about to happen and did not yet know what, and did not want to miss it. A boy near the front was grinning. An older couple looked pained and glanced toward the far end of the gate, where they knew, as everyone knew, that there would be more of us, that behind the one still man there is always the house, and the house does not sleep. I kept my eyes above her head. It was not contempt. I want to be clear on that, because she took it for contempt and it fed her, and perhaps if I could have made her understand that the stillness was not aimed at her, that I would have given the same nothing to a king or a beggar or an empty square, she would have deflated and gone home. But I could not make her understand it, because to explain it I would have had to break it, and breaking it was the one thing I would not do. "Right," she said, "right." She thrust the little dog at her assistant, who took it and clutched it against the coffee tray, and Mrs. Fenn stepped fully into my space now, so close I could smell her perfume over the cold iron and the river. She jabbed a finger at my chest, not quite touching the wool. "You," she said, "are the rudest, most jumped-up little man I have ever. You're nothing. You're a dormant in a costume. You're a toy." Her voice cracked on the word. "A toy soldier, that's all you are. And I want you to look at me. I want you to look at me and say sorry for being so unbelievably rude to a paying visitor, or I will have this filmed and I will have your job. I know people who could have you sweeping the yard by tea time." I looked at the cornice. The pigeon had gone. And that, the not looking, the last small refusal to give her the thing she had decided the whole morning must now hinge upon, that was what broke her. I heard her make a sound I have heard perhaps twice in my life, a kind of strangled shriek that is not anger and is not grief, but is the exact noise a person makes when the world declines, finally and flatly, to arrange itself around them. She spun. There was a municipal bin a few feet to my left, one of the tall dark green cans that stand at intervals along the gate for the visitors' litter, 3/4 full that morning with the leavings of the tourist trade. She seized it by its rim with both hands. It was heavier than she expected. I saw the surprise of it in her shoulders. For one moment I thought the weight would defeat her and the whole thing would collapse into farce. It did not. Rage lent her what she lacked. She hauled the can up and around and flung it at me with everything she had. I did not move. The can did not, in fact, strike me, though she meant it to, and told the magistrate later that she had not, which was a lie so transparent that even her own barrister let it go by with a wince. It struck the cobbles a full stride short. She had misjudged the weight, and the throw fell low and wide, and it hit and spun and emptied itself across the forecourt in a spreading gray fan of rubbish, coffee cups and food wrappers, and a bruised apple and the wet, sour contents of 100 strangers' small carelessness, and it rolled and clanged against the base of the gate pillar and lay there. And for a moment there was a silence over that square that I have never heard the like of before or since. Even the traffic beyond the wall seemed to hush. A gull cried once far off over the river. Then the crowd made its noise, a great collective intake, a rising murmur, a few voices raised in genuine outrage. Isn't that, did she just, someone should, is he all right? And a dozen phones, which had been filming the stillness, were now filming the mess. And Adela Vane stood in the center of it all with her cream coat and her empty hands and the slow, dawning look of a person who has just done a thing that cannot be undone and has begun, a half-second too late, to understand it. I stood my post, rifle at the slope, eyes forward. Because here is the second thing you must understand about the discipline, the thing the crowd never sees. I was not alone. I am never alone. The single guard at the gate is the visible tooth of a jaw that runs the whole length of the wall and deep into the courtyards beyond. When Mrs. Vane snapped her fingers, a camera in the gate arch had already turned. When her voice climbed, a sergeant in the guardroom 40 feet away had already risen from his chair. And when the can left her hands, before it had even landed, a door I could not see had already opened, and boots I knew by their cadence had already begun to cross the inner yard, unhurried, because the house is never hurried, because hurry is a kind of fear and the house does not fear a woman with a bin. The mess lay steaming faintly in the July sun. The apple had come to rest against my boot. I looked at the cornice where the pigeon had been and I waited, and I will tell you honestly that in that moment I felt no anger at all. What I felt, God help me, was something closer to pity, and under the pity, faint and unworthy and entirely human, the smallest ember of a thought I had no business having on post. I thought, you have no idea what you have just done. I thought you threw that at the gate, and the gate always answers. Sergeant Halloran reached the inner side of the arch first. I knew it was him before I saw him, from the particular weight of his step, and the way the crowd's murmur shifted as a second red coat came into view, this one moving, which is somehow more astonishing to onlookers than the one standing still, as though they had half forgotten we were men who could walk. He did not run. He came through the small pedestrian gate at the measured pace of a man for whom nothing is ever an emergency, and he took in the scene the way you would expect a man of 26 years' service to take in a scene. The mess, the woman, the crowd, me at my post, the can against the pillar. His eyes touched me for half a second, a question, you all right, son? And I gave him the smallest possible nothing, which he read correctly as yes, and he turned his attention to Mrs. Vane. Madam, he said, his voice was not loud, it did not need to be. I'm going to have to ask you to stay exactly where you are. And Adela Vane, who a moment before could have bought the street, drew herself up in her ruined cream coat and made the last free choice she would make that morning. She could have wilted. She could have wept, apologized, thrown herself on the mercy of the moment. The crowd, which loves a fall, also forgives a fall that knows itself. Instead, she pointed at me, standing motionless in the mess she had made, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry, the words that would, within the hour, seal the whole of what came next. He started it. That animal provoked me. I want him arrested. Sergeant Halloran did not blink. He had heard a great many things said at that gate over 26 years, and I do not think there was much left in the human repertoire that could surprise him. But I saw, in the way his jaw settled, that he had just heard the one sentence that would decide everything, and that it had decided it against her, and that she did not know it yet. "Madam," he said, with a patience so complete it was almost gentle, "there are, at last count, 11 cameras on this gate. 9 of them are ours. The other 2 are held by members of the public who have been filming for the last several minutes. I would advise you very strongly to say nothing further until you have spoken to a solicitor. But I will note, for your own sake, that everything that just happened is on record from 4 angles, and in none of them does that soldier move." "He looked at me," she said, "the way he looked at me." "He looked at the cornice, madam. He is trained to. It is the whole of his job." Halloran's eyes flicked to me and away, and I understood I was being cited as evidence, an exhibit in my own scarlet, and I stood a little straighter without meaning to. "Now, you've assaulted a sentry at a royal gate and you've scattered public refuse across a public forecourt, and I'm afraid both of those are matters we take seriously. Officers are on their way. They'll want your details. In the meantime," and here he glanced at the mess, the spreading gray fan of it, the apple against my boot, and something moved at the very corner of his mouth that in a lesser man would have been the beginning of a smile. "In the meantime, I'd ask you not to add to it." That was the moment the thing turned from an incident into a story. Because a woman had thrown a bin at the King's Guard, and the King's Guard had not moved, and the sergeant had said not to add to the mess, and up until then the mess had merely been a fact of the morning. The sort of thing a groundsman with a cart would sweep away by noon, and no one would remember by supper. But the word mess had been spoken aloud now, in front of 11 cameras, and it would not be swept away. It would grow legs. It would find its way, by a route I could not then have imagined, back to Adeline Fenn's own 2 hands. But I have got ahead of the telling again. Let me go back to the guardroom, and to the man who was, that day, in command of it, because to understand how a thrown bin became a public reckoning, you have to understand the machine that stood behind me, and the peculiar, exacting man at the top of it. The officer of the guard that week was Captain Reyner Ash. I had served under a good many officers, and I will tell you that they fall roughly into 2 kinds. There is the kind who love the ceremony, the plumes and the pipeclay, the crisp turn, the photograph, and who mistake the ceremony for the thing itself. And there is the rarer kind, who understand that the ceremony is only the outward sign of an inward vow, and who care about the vow. Captain Ash was of the second kind. He was a lean, gray, unsmiling man of perhaps 50, with a voice you had to lean in to hear, and a habit of quoting the standing orders from memory, chapter and clause, in a way that would have been insufferable if he had not so plainly, so bone-deeply, believed every word of them. He had come up through the ranks himself, which the plume and pipeclay sort rarely had, and so he knew what it was to stand 2 hours at a gate with a stone in your boot and a fool in your face, and he did not forget it when he pinned on his captain's crowns. He was in the guardroom when the report came through, standing over the bank of monitors with his hands clasped behind his back, and by the time Halloran had walked out to me, he had already watched the whole of it twice. I did not see this part myself, of course. I was at the gate, being an exhibit, but the guardroom is a small place and soldiers talk, and I have pieced it together since from 3 men who were there, and they all tell it the same way, which in a soldier is as close to gospel as you will get. Ash watched the woman snap her fingers. He watched her jab her finger. He watched her hurl the bin. He watched me not move. And when it was done, he said nothing for a long moment, and the corporal at the monitors, young Petrie, A decent lad said afterward that the silence was the worst part, that he would rather Ash had shouted. Then Ash said very quietly, "Play it again, from when she takes the dog off the girl." They played it again. "There," said Ash, "you see how she hands the dog away. She frees both her hands. That is not a woman who loses her temper and lashes out. That is a woman who decides. She has time to think and she chooses this." He straightened. "Corporal Petrie, I want that clip preserved, time-stamped, and copied to the duty log before anyone so much as breathes on it. I want the names of the 2 members of the public who were filming, and I want them thanked and asked politely if they would be willing to give a statement. And I want the palace controller informed that we have an assault on a sentry at the east gate, that the sentry is unharmed and remains on post, and that the perpetrator is being detained pending the arrival of the officers." He paused. "And Petrie? Is Vane all right?" "He hasn't moved, sir," said Petrie, which Ash took correctly as the answer to a different and larger question, and he nodded once, and that was the whole of his concern for me made and discharged in 4 words, and I have loved him for it ever since. Out at the gate, meanwhile, the world was doing what worlds do. 2 officers had arrived, not the palace guard but the civil police, summoned as protocol required, because an assault is an assault whether the victim wears a bearskin or not, and they were taking Mrs. Fenn's details, and Mrs. Fenn was explaining to them at length and volume that she was the victim, that I had provoked her, that she had never in her life, that they had no idea who they were dealing with. The younger officer wrote it all down with the flat, tireless patience of a man who has heard "Do you know who I am" from behind more steering wheels than he can count. The older one had walked over to the mess and was looking at it with his hands on his hips, and then he looked at me, and then he looked back at the mess, and I saw him do a small piece of arithmetic behind his eyes. The assistant, I would later learn her name was Pia, and that she had worked for Mrs. Fenn for 2 years and had, that very morning, already privately drafted her resignation, and lacked only the courage to hand it over, stood to one side with the trembling dog and the tray of coffees, and she was crying, quietly, in the way of a person who has been braced for a disaster for a long time and is almost relieved now that it has come, that it is no longer only hers to fear. And I stood my post. I want to dwell here for a moment on the standing, because everyone remembers the throw, and everyone remembers what came after, but the throw took 2 seconds and what came after took weeks, and the standing was hours. I had another 40 minutes on that watch, and I served every one of them. It would have been the easiest thing in the world, and no one would have blamed me to be relieved early, to step off, to sit down in the guardroom with a mug of sweet tea and let the adrenaline shake its way out of my hands. Ash offered it. "Through Halloran, Captain says you can stand down if you want it, son." And I sent back the only answer I could send, which was that I would finish my watch. I did not do it to be admired. There was no one to admire it. The crowd could not tell an ordinary watch from a defiant one. I did it because the whole of the thing, the whole reason a woman could throw a bin at me and be so wholly, so satisfyingly wrong to have done it, rested on the fact that the gate does not falter. If I had stepped off, even justly, even by right, I would have proved her a little bit correct, that I could be moved, that the stillness had a price and she had found it. So I stayed. I stood in the wreck of her tantrum with an apple against my boot, and I let the July sun climb, and I finished my watch, and when my relief came at the proper minute, I handed off the post exactly as the standing orders require, and only then did I march off through the arch, heels ringing on the stone, spine straight, having given her nothing to the very last. Behind me, the mess stayed where it was. That, too, was deliberate, though I did not learn until later whose deliberation it was. The groundsman came, as groundsmen do, at 1:15 with his cart and his broom and his good intention, and he was stopped at the arch by Sergeant Halloran, who told him to leave it. "Leave it, Sergeant." "Leave it," said Halloran. "Orders. The forecourt stays as it is until further notice. Rope it off if you like. but nobody touches so much as a coffee cup. The groundsman, whose name was Old Corliss and who had swept that forecourt for 31 years and considered it, not without reason, his own, was scandalized. A mess in front of the east gate, where the whole world came to take its photographs, he argued. Halloran, who did not argue, simply repeated the order and added that it came from Captain Ash, and Old Corliss, muttering, fetched 2 brass stanchions and a length of red rope from the store and cordoned off the woman's wreckage as though it were a monument, which, though none of us knew it yet, was very nearly what it would become. I heard about the roping off in the guardroom afterward, over the sweet tea I had earned, and I confess I did not understand it. Why leave it? A mess at the gate shamed the house, surely, not the woman who made it. If anything, the sensible move was to sweep it away at once, restore the dignity of the place, and pursue Mrs. Fenn through the courts in the quiet, invisible way such things are pursued. It was Halloran who set me straight, in his slow way, blowing across the top of his own mug. "You're thinking like a soldier, lad," he said. "Ash isn't thinking like a soldier. Ash is thinking like a man who's read every clause of the household statutes and half the common law besides, and he's found something in there, or I'm a Dutchman. He didn't leave that mess to shame the house. He left it because he's going to need it." "Need it for what?" Halloran only smiled into his tea and would not say, and I did not press him, because you did not press Halloran, and because I had learned over the years that the answers a man will not give you are usually the ones you will enjoy most when they arrive. I want to tell you now about Adeline Fenn, insofar as I ever came to know her, because a story like this can curdle into cruelty very easily if the person who is humbled is left a mere cartoon of a person, and she was not a cartoon. She was, I think, a genuinely unhappy woman, and her unhappiness had for years been converted, by the strange alchemy of money, into a kind of tyranny that she mistook for strength. She had made her fortune, or rather married into most of it and doubled the rest in property. She truly could have bought a good part of the street. That was no idle boast, and she had built around herself, over 30 years, a small kingdom of people who were paid to agree with her. Assistants like poor Pia. Decorators, drivers, a personal chef, a woman whose sole employment was the management of Mrs. Fenn's diary, and another whose sole employment was the management of the first woman. And in a kingdom like that, where every voice you hear is a voice on your payroll, a strange thing happens to a person. They lose the ability to be told no. The word simply stops reaching them. It is intercepted at every level, softened, reframed, made to disappear, until the person at the center comes genuinely to believe that the world is arranged around their preference, because within the small kingdom of their money, it is. And then one July morning that person walks up to a royal gate, where stands a man who cannot be bought, cannot be fired, cannot be flattered, cannot be moved, a man whose entire profession is the living embodiment of no, and the collision is not really about a wave, or a smile, or a photograph for her followers. The collision is between a woman who has forgotten that no exists and an institution that is made of nothing else. She never had a chance. That is what I understood in time. From the moment she decided the stillness was insolence, she was going to break herself against it, because the stillness was not insolence and could not be argued into becoming insolence, and a person who cannot bear to be refused, meeting the one thing in the world that will only ever refuse, has already lost. The bin was just the sound the losing made. The officers took her details and let her go that afternoon. She was not arrested, whatever she had feared and however the crowd had bayed for it. An assault of that kind, where the victim was unharmed and the assailant had no history, is not the sort of thing that ends in a cell, and Captain Ash, I would learn, had no interest whatsoever in seeing her in a cell. She went home to her large, quiet house, and, I have no doubt, to a great deal of telephoning, and she began to marshal the only army she had ever commanded, the army of the paid. By that evening, her solicitor had contacted the palace. By the next morning, a public relations firm had issued, on her behalf, a statement so brazen that it took the breath away, a statement in which Mrs. Fenn, a devoted patron of the arts and a lifelong supporter of the Crown, expressed her deep distress at the aggressive and unprofessional conduct of a member of the Palace Guard, who had, the statement claimed, verbally provoked and physically intimidated her until she was forced to defend herself. She was, the statement concluded, considering all legal options, and trusted that the palace would hold its staff to the standards the public rightly expected. I read it in the guardroom the next day, passed hand to hand among the men, and I will not pretend it did not sting. Physically intimidated, I had not so much as turned my head. But that is the particular poison of a lie about a man who cannot speak for himself. The guard does not give interviews. The guard does not have a spokesman. The guard is a symbol, and a symbol cannot defend its own name. She was counting on that. She was counting on the fact that I was mute by profession, that the House would want the whole thing to go quietly away, that a woman with money and a public relations firm could simply outshout a soldier who was forbidden to shout back. She had not reckoned on Captain Reyner Ash, and she certainly had not reckoned on the two members of the public who had been filming. Their names were Denholm and Adela Care, a married couple, tourists of the pilgrim kind, who had come to see the gate and had happened, with their two phones, to capture the entire episode from two clean angles. The snap of the fingers, the jabbing finger, the handing off of the dog, the deliberate seizing of the bin, the throw, and above all my perfect and undeniable stillness through the whole of it. Captain Ash's request that they be thanked and asked politely, for a statement had reached them within the hour, and they had not only agreed but had, of their own accord, refused several very generous offers from newspapers to buy their footage, on the principle. Mr. Care said this to Ash's face, and Ash told Halloran, and Halloran told me, and I have treasured it since, that it didn't seem right to sell the truth to the highest bidder when a decent man's name was on the line. So when Mrs. Fenn's brazen statement went out, the House did not need to say a word in its own defense. It simply, quietly, made the Care's footage available to the same outlets, with the couple's blessing, and let the two versions stand side by side. Here was Mrs. Fenn's account: an aggressive guard, verbal provocation, physical intimidation, a woman forced to defend herself. And here was 90 seconds of clean footage in which a woman snapped her fingers in a motionless man's face, called him a toy, handed her dog away, hefted a public bin, and hurled it at him while he stood like the stone lions above the arch and did not move a single muscle. The lie died in a day. It died the way lies die in the age of the lifted phone, not with a grand refutation but with a split screen, her words on one side and the footage on the other, and the whole watching world able to see for itself which was true. By that evening the clip had been shared past counting. By the next morning it had a name, the name the world gives things it has decided to love. They were calling it the Bin Lady. And where a lie will spread fast, a lie caught in the very act of lying spreads faster and with a gleeful cruelty all its own. And now Adela Fenn, who had gone to the gate that morning to be seen against the palace, was being seen against it by more people than she could have reached in 10,000 of her little films, but not at all in the way she had wanted. I felt, watching this happen, a complicated thing. There was a part of me, I will be honest, that was glad. She had thrown a bin at me and lied about it to a public relations firm, and there is a rough justice in a lie eating itself in public, and I would be a saint or a liar to say I took no satisfaction in it. But there was another part of me, the part that had felt pity at the gate, that watched the world turn her into a hashtag and a punchline, and felt something close to unease. Because a crowd that has decided to love your humbling is not a just thing. It is only the same mob that would have loved her triumph, turned the other way. It has no sense of proportion. It would have hounded her into ruin and called it justice, and moved on to the next amusement by the weekend, and none of it would have had anything to do with the actual wrong, which was that she had thrown a bin at a man doing his duty and lied about it. Captain Ash, I would come to understand, felt the same unease, and for a far more principled reason than mine. And it was out of that unease, out of a refusal to let the matter be settled by the mob, or by the money, or by the lawyers, but only and exactly by what was just, that the strangest and most fitting resolution I have ever witnessed began, quietly, to take shape. It began, as it happened, with a summons I was not expecting. An order, 3 days after the throw, to present myself in my best dress at the controller's office, where I would find waiting for me not only Captain Ash, but a woman I had seen only from a distance in 11 years of service, and had certainly never been addressed by. The king's own sister, Princess Adela. I had polished my boots until I could shave in them and brushed my tunic until Halloran, inspecting me at the guardroom door, could find nothing to say, which from Halloran was the highest praise the language allows. I marched to the controller's office through the inner corridors of the palace. A part of the house I rarely saw, all quiet carpet and old portraits, and the particular hush of rooms where important things are decided in low voices. And I presented myself, and I stood to attention, and I waited to be told why an ordinary corporal had been summoned before the king's sister. Princess Adela was not what I had expected. I had expected, I suppose, grandeur. What I found was a small, upright woman past 60 in a plain gray dress, with iron in her hair and iron in her spine, and a pair of pale, level eyes that took the measure of a person in the time it took to cross a room. She was, I would learn, the member of the royal family least given to ceremony and most given to work. She chaired committees no one else wanted, visited hospitals no camera followed, and had a reputation among the household staff, who love no one they do not have to, of being fair to the point of severity and utterly, blessedly free of side. When she looked at me I had the sensation, uncommon in the presence of the great, of being seen as a person rather than a fixture. "Corporal Vane," she said, "stand easy. I've watched the footage. I imagine you're tired of people telling you they've watched the footage." "Ma'am," I said, which was the only word available to me, and she gave a small dry huff that might, in a less formidable woman, have been the beginning of a laugh. "Captain Ash speaks very highly of you," she went on. "He is not a man who speaks highly of anyone, so you should take it seriously. He tells me you finished your watch, that after this woman flung a bin at you, you stood your post for another 40 minutes and refused the offer to stand down." She tilted her head. "Why?" I had not expected to have to explain it. At the gate it had been obvious, a thing beneath explaining. Here, in this quiet room before this level gaze, I found I had to reach for the words, and when I found them they surprised me a little with their plainness. Because if I'd stepped off, ma'am, she'd have been a little bit right, about being able to move me, and she wasn't right, so I stayed. Princess Adela looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Captain Ash, who was standing to one side with his cap under his arm and his gray face giving nothing away, and something passed between them that I was not part of and did not need to be. "There," she said to him, "that is precisely the point, isn't it? She wasn't right. And I am tired to the back teeth of watching the whole realm treat this as a matter of whether some rich, unhappy woman is to be publicly torn to pieces for our entertainment, when the actual matter, the only matter, is that she was not right, and the house exists to make that plain, and to make it plain in a way that mends rather than merely punishes." She turned back to me. "Do you know why the mess was left where it fell, Corporal?" "No, ma'am." "Captain Ash left it," she said, "because he had an idea, and he was decent enough and clever enough to bring the idea to me before he acted on it, rather than to the newspapers. Captain." And Captain Ash, in his quiet voice that you had to lean in to hear, laid it out. "There is, in the ancient statutes of the household, statutes that go back further than anyone living can properly account for, and that have been added to and amended by 100 reigns without ever quite being tidied up, a provision concerning the fouling of royal ground. It is a very old law, framed in a time when to foul the ground before a royal gate was understood as an insult not merely to the house, but to the whole ordered fabric of the realm, the king's peace made visible in the swept and orderly forecourt of his home. And the old law did not, in its wisdom, prescribe a fine, or a whipping, or a term of imprisonment, as you might expect of an old law. It prescribed something stranger and, I have come to believe, wiser. It prescribed restitution in kind. He who fouls the king's ground shall himself make it clean with his own hand, and shall not be discharged of the offense until the ground is restored to the order in which he found it. It has not been invoked in 140 years, said Captain Ash. I looked. The last recorded instance was a drunken lord who overturned a cart of night soil at the west gate on a wager, and was required by the magistrate to shovel every ounce of it back into the cart and cart it away himself before a crowd over the course of an afternoon. There is an engraving of it. He never lived it down. It ended, I am told, a very promising career. A muscle moved at the corner of Ash's mouth. The statute has never been repealed. It is dormant, not dead. And it applies, word for word, to what happened at the East Gate 3 days ago. I began slowly to understand why the mess had been roped off and preserved like a monument. It was evidence, yes, but it was more than evidence. It was the ground she had fouled, kept in the fouling, waiting for the law to require her to make it clean. But, I said, and then stopped, because it was not my place to raise objections in that room. Say it, Corporal, said Princess Adela. You have earned the right to a question. But she has money, ma'am, and lawyers. Won't she simply pay someone, send that poor girl of hers, the assistant, to do the cleaning, or a firm? The law says she must make it clean. It doesn't say she must do it with her own hands. It does, said Captain Ash, say exactly that, with his own hand. The old drafters were not fools. They had met rich men before. They understood precisely the trick you have just named, and they closed it off in the very wording. The whole point of the punishment, the reason it was framed as restitution in kind rather than a fine, is that a fine can be delegated, and a fine to a rich person is merely a price, a thing you pay and forget. But you cannot delegate your own hand. You cannot pay someone to be humbled for you. The bending must be done by the back that gave the offense, or it is not restitution at all. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him, there was something almost warm in the gray of his face. That is why the law is wise, Corporal. It does not seek to ruin her. It does not hand her to the mob. It seeks only to make her, with her own 2 hands, restore the order she broke, and in the doing to let her feel in her own back and her own knees the exact weight of the small, orderly world she treated as beneath her. That is not cruelty. That is proportion. That is the difference between vengeance and justice, and it is the whole of what this house is for. I have thought about those words a great many times in the years since. That is the difference between vengeance and justice. The mob wanted vengeance. It wanted her torn apart, ruined, made an example past all proportion, and it would have called that justice and felt righteous doing it. The old law wanted something harder and quieter and infinitely more difficult to give. It wanted her to clean up her own mess, exactly and only her own mess, no more and no less, and to be released the moment it was clean. It wanted her not destroyed but restored, and the ground with her. Princess Adela rose. It will be done publicly, she said, because the offense was public, and a private penance for a public wrong teaches no one anything, and lets the mob go on believing we have swept it under the carpet for a friend of the family, which, I am reliably informed, is exactly what the newspapers are already suggesting. She will do it in the open, before the same gate, in whatever weather the day sees fit to send. But it will be done with dignity, Corporal. Do you understand me? There will be no jeering permitted, no photographs sold, no circus. The guard will stand its post. The public may watch as the public watches everything, but they will watch in silence, and they will watch a wrong being mended, not a woman being broken. I will see to that personally. She paused at the door. And you will be there. Ma'am. You will stand your post at the east gate that morning, she said, as you did the morning she threw the bin, not to gloat. God forbid. but because it is your post, and because the whole meaning of the thing is that the gate does not move, that she can throw what she likes and lie what she likes and command what army of the page she likes. And when it is over, the same man will be standing in the same place, having given her nothing, and she will be on her knees before him gathering up the coffee cups of strangers, not because he has triumphed over her, but because that is simply what is true, and the ground before the king's gate is where the truth is made plain. She looked at me one last time with those level pale eyes. You held the line, Corporal Vane. Now come and see what the line was holding for. And she was gone, and Captain Ash gave me the smallest nod I have ever received and the proudest, and I marched back to the guardroom in a daze, and I understood that I had just been let in on the answer Halloran had smiled about and would not give needed for what, and that the answer was the most beautiful and terrible thing I had ever heard. He needed the mess. He needed it because he was going to make her clean it up. Now, the law being the law, none of this could simply be decreed. Even a dormant royal statute must pass through a court, and Mrs. Fenn had the right, which she vigorously exercised, to contest it. Her lawyers were, I am told, magnificent, the very best money could summon, and money could summon a great deal. They argued that the statute was archaic, absurd, a relic, that no reasonable modern court could impose so demeaning a penalty, that their client was a woman of standing and delicate health, that the whole thing was a piece of feudal theater dredged up to satisfy a public appetite for humiliation. They argued for 3 days before the magistrate, and they argued well, and there were moments, I heard, when it seemed they might prevail. And then, on the 3rd day, the House played the card that Captain Ash had been holding since the morning of the throw, the card that was the whole reason the mess had been roped off and preserved, and the reason he had refused to let a single coffee cup be swept away. He offered Mrs. Fenn a choice. The assault on a sentry, you see, was a separate and far graver matter than the fouling of the ground. An assault on a member of the King's Guard on royal duty was, under the ordinary criminal law, no dormant statute, no feudal relic, but the plain modern code, an offense that could carry a genuine sentence. And the footage, the 4 clean angles, the deliberate handing off of the dog that showed she had chosen and not merely lashed out, made a conviction as near to certain as anything in law ever is. Her lawyers knew it. She knew it. A conviction of that kind on a woman of her standing meant a criminal record and possibly worse, and the ruin of exactly the reputation she had gone to the gate to burnish. So the House, through the magistrate, offered her this. The Crown would not press the criminal charge of assault, would let it fall entirely, if she accepted, freely and in open court, the old statute's restitution in kind. She would make clean with her own hand the ground she had fouled publicly before the East Gate on a day appointed. Do this, and the graver matter was closed forever, no record, no conviction, the slate wiped. Refuse and the assault charge would proceed, and she would take her chances with a jury who had all, every one of them, seen the footage. It was, when you look at it squarely, an act of mercy dressed as a punishment. Captain Ash had built her a door out of the worst of it, and the price of the door was that she must kneel and clean. He had characteristically arranged matters so that the just outcome and the merciful outcome were the same outcome, and had left her free, genuinely free. That was the point, to choose it or not. She chose it. Of course she chose it. Faced with a criminal record and a real sentence on the one hand, and an afternoon's cleaning on the other, even a woman who had never in her life been told no could do the arithmetic. But I am told, and this part I believe, because it is the part that redeems her a little in my memory, that when the choice was put to her, and she understood that the man who had built the door for her was the very captain of the guard she had lied about, and that the whole apparatus of the House had declined to destroy her when it so easily could have, something in her went very quiet. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, and she waved him off. And she said, in a small voice quite unlike the one that had carried across the forecourt, that she accepted. The day appointed was a Thursday in the last week of July, and it dawned gray and close and threatening rain, which Princess Adela, when it was reported to her, received with a grim satisfaction. "Good," she said. "Let it be honest weather. This is not a day for sunshine." I stood my post. I had been on the east gate since 8 that morning in the full dress, rifle at the slope, and I had watched the forecourt fill. Old Corliss's brass stanchions and red rope still cordon off the mess, 3 weeks old now, and the house had preserved it under a weighted tarpaulin against the weather, so that it might be uncovered clean as it had fallen, the very same coffee cups and wrappers and the shriveled ghost of the bruised apple. The public had gathered in numbers, but they were not the mob I had feared. Princess Adela had seen to that. There were notices posted and marshals in plain dark coats along the rope line, and the word had gone out clearly beforehand, through the same outlets that had made her a punchline. This is not a spectacle. Come if you wish, but come in silence. Anyone who jeers, anyone who films to mock will be asked to leave. And to my lasting faith in ordinary people, they came in silence and they kept it. Several hundred of them, standing along the rope in the gray morning, and you could have heard a coin drop on the cobbles. She arrived a little before 10. There was no cream coat. That struck me first. She had come in plain dark clothes, sensible clothes, the clothes of a person who has understood what the day requires, and she had come without her phone, without her dog, without the trailing entourage. She had come, I noticed, with only one companion, Paya, the assistant who had not resigned after all, and who walked a half-step behind her not now as a servant but as something more like a friend, and who carried, of all things, a second pair of rubber gloves. I have wondered since whether that second pair of gloves meant Paya intended to help her, in defiance of the law that the hand must be the offender's own, and I have decided that it does not matter, because Paya was not made to use them, and their being there at all told me that the small kingdom of the paid had, in 3 weeks, become something with at least one real person in it, and that was the first sign I had that the day might mend more than the ground. The magistrate's clerk read out the terms briefly in the flat voice of officialdom. Princess Adela was present, standing to one side with Captain Ash, plain gray among the dark coats, watching with her level eyes. And then old Corliss, with enormous ceremony and no small satisfaction, drew back the weighted tarpaulin, and there it was, the mess exactly as she had made it, 3 weeks preserved. The coffee cups, the greasy bag, the cigarette ends, the bruised, shriveled apple, the overturned bin lying against the base of the pillar where it had rolled to rest against the ornamental iron, in the very spot where, 3 weeks before, it had come to lie astride from my boot. Adeline Fenn stood at the edge of the rope and looked at it for a long moment. The whole square looked with her. And I stood my post above it all, eyes forward on the far cornice where a pigeon, I swear this is true, I have never dared put it in the retelling for fear no one would believe me, but it is true, where a pigeon had returned and was making its slow census of the ledge, exactly as one had done on the morning of the throw. Then Mrs. Fenn pulled on the rubber gloves, and she knelt down on the cobblestones of the king's forecourt, in her plain dark clothes in the gray light, and she began to clean up the mess. I cannot tell you how strange it was to watch. I could not watch it directly. My eyes were forward, on the cornice, on the pigeon, on the nothing that is my whole profession, but the east gate faces the square, and a man may see a great deal at the very edge of his vision without ever moving his eyes, and I saw it all. I saw her pick up the first coffee cup, awkwardly, the way a person picks up something they have never in their life had to pick up, and place it in the bin she had righted. I saw her reach for the greasy bag and hesitate, and take it anyway. I saw her gather the cigarette ends one by one, on her knees, on the hard stone, in front of several hundred silent strangers and the king's sister and the captain of the guard, and I saw the exact moment, perhaps 10 minutes in, when her back had begun to ache and her knees to protest the cobbles and the first fat drops of the threatened rain had begun to fall. I saw the exact moment when the thing stopped being a humiliation and became something else. Because here is what the old law understood that the mob never will. When you make a proud person clean up their own mess with their own hands, on their knees in the rain, the first 10 minutes are humiliation. They burn. They are the worst thing in the world. But if the crowd is silent, if no one jeers, if no one films to mock, if the whole apparatus around the penance is grave and fair and free of cruelty, then something happens in the 11th minute and the 12th and the 20th that the mob's version can never produce. The humiliation burns itself out, and underneath it, exposed like ground after a fire, there is only the work, just the work. The plain, honest, ancient work of making an untidy thing tidy, which is the oldest work there is, and which has in it, I have seen this now, I know it to be true, a strange and leveling peace. By the 20th minute, Adela Vane was not being humbled, she was just cleaning. The rain had come on properly now, a soft gray persistent rain, and she was soaked through, and her sensible clothes were streaked with the grime of the forecourt, and her carefully kept hair had come down in wet ropes about her face, and she knelt on the cobbles and gathered the leavings of 100 strangers into the bin methodically without hurry, and there was on her face, I saw it at the very edge of my vision, not the wild, snapping, frightened rage of the morning 3 weeks before, but a kind of terrible quiet, the quiet of a person who is, perhaps for the first time in 30 years, entirely alone with a task and a truth, and no one on the payroll to intercept it. It took her the better part of an hour. No one hurried her. That was part of the law, too, and part of Princess Adela's design. She was not to be rushed, and she was not to be helped. The ground must be restored to the order in which she found it, and she alone must restore it, and she must be discharged only when it was done, truly done, not merely gestured at. Twice a marshal moved forward to check her work, and once found a cigarette end she had missed lodged in a crack between the cobbles, and pointed it out silently, and she went back on her knees in the rain and worked it free with her fingernails and dropped it in the bin, and only then was she allowed to go on. There was no cruelty in it. There was only thoroughness, which to a person who has done a wrong is the kindest thing of all, because half a penance is worse than none. It leaves the debt hanging, unpaid, unmended. She was permitted to pay it in full. And when it was done, when the last cup was in the bin, and the last wrapper and the last shriveled remnant of that bruised apple, and the forecourt of the east gate lay swept and clean and orderly in the gray rain, exactly as it had lain on the morning before she ever came to it, Adela Vane stood up. Slowly, stiffly, an older woman than she had knelt down, her knees bruised and her back aching and her clothes ruined and her face washed bare by the rain. She stood up, and she looked at the clean ground she had made, and then she did a thing that no law required and no one had asked of her and no one, I think, expected. She turned to face me at my post and she inclined her head, not a grovel, not a performance for the crowd who could barely see it and would not have known what it meant. A small plain bow of the head from her to me, soldier to citizen, the exact gesture of respect she had come to the gate 3 weeks before determined to extract from me by force, given now freely by her to me. And I could not return it. I was on post. The gate does not bow. But I met her eyes for the smallest fraction of a second, the only time in the whole affair that my eyes ever came down from the cornice, and I have never told Captain Ash, and I never will, and I let her see, in that fraction of a second, that it was received, that the debt was paid and the ground was clean and there was nothing more owed between us. And then my eyes went back to the cornice, and the pigeon, and the nothing, and she turned and walked away across the clean cobbles with Pyre at her side, and the several hundred strangers along the rope kept the silence they had been asked to keep, and it was, of everything I have witnessed in 11 years at that gate, the most dignified thing I ever saw. That is nearly the end of it, but not quite, and the not quite is the part I most want you to carry away. The clip of her cleaning, for someone did film it, of course. Despite everything, you cannot stop. Every phone went out into the world that evening, and I braced for the mob to feast on it as it had feasted on the throw. But a strange thing happened, and it has restored some of my faith in the great watching crowd which I had rather lost. The mob did not feast. The clip of the throw had been shared with glee, with mockery, with the gleeful cruelty of people watching the mighty fall. But the clip of the cleaning was shared with something else entirely. It was shared with a kind of hush. People watched a proud woman kneel in the rain and clean up her own mess in silence with no one jeering, and they did not know what to do with it, because it was not the humiliation they had been promised. It was too quiet to mock and too grave to cheer. It made them, I think, a little ashamed of how they had enjoyed the first clip. And the comment that rose to the top beneath the video, the one that thousands of strangers marked as saying the thing they could not say themselves, was only this: I came here to laugh at her. I can't. This is just fair. This is just fair. There is no higher praise for an act of justice than that a crowd assembled to be cruel goes quiet and calls it fair. Princess Adela had wanted a wrong mended rather than a woman broken, and she had got it. And the crowd, which cannot mend and loves to break, had been made by silence, by proportion, by the plain sight of a debt honestly paid, to see the difference, and to prefer it. I do not think Adela Fenn was destroyed by that Thursday. I think she was, in some strange way the old drafters of the law understood better than any of us, set free by it. She had done a wrong, and she had been made to mend it exactly and only, and then she had been let go clean, the slate wiped, the way you can only ever be let go clean when you have actually paid. The mob would have hounded her for years and never let her be. The law let her be, the moment the ground was clean. I heard some months later that she had quietly closed down the small kingdom of the paid, let the diary manager go, and the manager of the diary manager, and kept on only Paya, now as a genuine friend and companion rather than a servant to be waved at. I heard she had begun, without any fanfare, to fund the cleaning and restoration of a number of public gardens and forecourts about the city, on her knees some days herself, they said, with her sleeves rolled up, which the newspapers would have loved to make into a story, and which she took some care to keep them from making into a story, because she was not doing it to be seen against anything. I do not know if this is true. I like to believe it is. It has the shape of the kind of thing that Thursday might have grown, and I have learned to trust the shape of things. As for me, I went on standing my post. That is the part people find least satisfying when I tell it, and it is the part I most insist upon. They want to know what changed for me, how I was rewarded, whether I was thanked. And the answer is that I finished my watch that Thursday, as I had finished my watch the morning of the throw, and I marched off at the proper minute. And the next morning I was back on the gate at 8, rifle at the slope, eyes on the cornice, giving the whole passing world the same nothing I have always given it. Captain Ash never spoke to me of it again, beyond that one proud nod. Princess Adela sent, some weeks later, a short note in her own hand, which I keep, and which says only, "You held the line. The line was worth holding. Thank you, that is all. There was no medal. There should not have been. I had not done anything that Thursday but stand where I was told to stand and give nothing, which is the whole of my job, and you do not give a man a medal for doing his job, or the doing of it becomes about the medal, and then the gate is lost. Because that, in the end, is the thing the whole affair taught me, standing at its still center while the storm of it broke and spent itself and settled into that clean gray rain. The stillness is not weakness, and it is not pride, and it is not contempt, whatever the Adela Fenns of the world decide it is. The stillness is a promise, held for people who will never know it was held for them. When she snapped her fingers in my face, I was holding the line for the old couple who straightened when they passed, and for the pilgrims who came a long way to find the thing real, and for the frightened who take comfort from a fixed point in a moving world. And though she could not have known it and would have laughed to be told it, I was holding it for her, too. Because a person who has forgotten that no exists is a person in some danger, adrift in a world with no edges, and the greatest kindness the house could do her, the thing it did do her, through a dormant law and a preserved mess and a gray Thursday's rain, was to be, at last, the one thing in her life that would not move, and against which she could finally, safely, break and be mended and be let go. She threw a trash can at the gate, And the gate, as it always does, answered, not with anger, not with a blow, not with the ruin the mob demanded, but by handing her with its own 2 hands the means to make herself clean. And she took it, and knelt, and did. They still tell the story around the palace, in the low, delighted voice men use for a story too neat to be invented. An entitled woman threw a bin at a royal guard, they say, and then she had to clean up the whole mess herself. And they laugh because it is a funny story and it is a satisfying story, and there is nothing wrong with laughing at it. But when they have finished laughing, sometimes one of the older men, one who was there, will grow quiet and say the thing that is truer than the laugh. He'll say, "No, but you should have seen the end of it. You should have seen her bow to Vane when it was done, and him not able to bow back, and just the 2 of them for half a second understanding each other across all that clean, wet ground. That wasn't a woman being beaten, that one. That was a woman being put right. And there's a world of difference, and it's the whole of what we're for. And I stand my post, and I say nothing, because that is my job, and because he has it exactly right, and there is nothing left for me to add." The gate does not move, but it always, always answers. And if you are very lucky and the house is just, and someone somewhere still remembers the old wise law, the answer it gives you is not your ruin. It is your knees on the honest stone, and the rain and the plain work of your own 2 hands making clean the mess you made. And then, when it is done, the door held open, and the long walk out across the swept ground free.